All right, welcome everyone. I'm Amy Talbot, the Water Efficiency Program Manager with the Regional Water Authority, and I'll be your presenter for today's webinar titled Beyond the Lawn, How Businesses and HOAs Can Prepare for California's Non-Functional Turf Law. If you feel comfortable, we would love to know a bit about you, including your organization, your water supplier, your role in implementing this new law, and your main interests or concerns about non-functional turf, or NFT as we'll call it, throughout the webinar. Please share your information in the chat while we're waiting for others to join, and we'll give it about another minute or so to make sure everyone's present. And as people are filtering in, just if you could share your organization, who your water supplier is, your role in implementing this new law, and then your main interest or concern with non-functional turf. And we'll make sure to cover all the main interests and concerns throughout the webinar, or at least in the Q&A as well. All right. It seems like we're getting to a critical mass, so we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation as you continue to fill in your information. And then just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping things to get us set up for the next hour or so. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees will be muted, and feel free to submit questions as we go along in the Q&A button on your screen. The live transcript or closed captioning is available by clicking the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen, and the slides and recording will be emailed to you this week. Okay, and then a little background about Regional Water Authority. RWA is a joint powers authority that's a regional government agency with 20 plus public and private water supplier members throughout the Sacramento region. You can see the service areas of our member agencies on this slide. We basically cover Sacramento up I-80 and I-50 to Tahoe. This area covers about 2.2 million people. RWA really focuses in four main areas: groundwater planning, we do advocacy, legislation work, grant administration, and then water efficiency. If you want to learn more, you can visit our websites at rwah2o.org and our customer water efficiency focused website at BeWaterSmart.info. This webinar is brought to you as part of the Regional Water Efficiency Program that I manage. Our program was started in 2003 with representation from each participating water agency. We've got about 17 participating suppliers right now. Our annual budget is around $650,000, plus typically between $1 million and $2 million in state and federal grants. I'm the primary staff person for the program, but receive assistance for our communications consultant team and an advisory committee of our participating water suppliers. The program focuses on public outreach, school education, and a rebate program with the goal of saving water at home and work through increased water efficiency. We have many active program partners. A couple are listed here, including the Sacramento Tree Foundation, Sac Sewer, and Green Acres Nursery and Supply. Communicating this non-functional turf law is a requirement for water suppliers as part of the law, and that's where this new law and then our program overlap for that purpose. So here are the topics we'll cover today. The basics of the law, just like what does the law say specifically? Why does the law matter? Compliance deadlines by property type, because this law affects multiple property types. We'll talk about non-functional turf versus functional turf, the definitions and examples of both. Talk about existing trees and how they're impacted by this law. Enforcement options, compliance options, so you make sure you're complying with the law. And then non-functional turf conversion examples to give you an idea if you were to remove the non-functional turf, what it could look like. And then we'll wrap up with available resources and rebates. And then finally, hoping to leave about half of the time we have together today to answer a question and answers at the very end. Okay, so without further ado, Assembly Bill 1572 was sponsored by Laura Friedman, and that became law in October of 2023, and that became known as what we're talking about today, the non-functional turf law. The primary requirement of the law is the prohibition of the use of potable or drinking water on what is considered to be non-functional turf on commercial, industrial, institutional, otherwise known as CII, and homeowner association properties of any size. This includes larger areas of turf, like think of a big open field, but also road medians, fenced areas, parking lots, street right-of-ways, community interest landscapes. A lot of other things are included in there. It's important to note that individual single family and multifamily properties, along with areas like sports fields, picnic areas, and cemeteries, are exempt from this law. It's also important to note that water suppliers are required to communicate the new law to customers, but may enforce the law. And we'll get into more details of what that could mean later in the presentation. This law impacts a lot of properties, including businesses, HOAs, and public properties, and will be implemented at a phased approach with compliance deadlines between January 2027 and January 2031. This is kind of simply a summary of the new law on one slide. However, we'll go into more details in the presentation today. But if you're interested in reading the actual text of the legislation, I've included a link at the bottom so you can learn more. So, what's the reasoning behind passing this bill and why does it matter now? The law was passed to help California prepare for long-term water shortages and to adapt to climate change by eliminating unnecessary irrigation on lawn. Additional benefit is the replacement of lawn with low water use plants and alternative ground cover that can save customers and property time and money on water and maintenance bills over time. But regardless of kind of how the law came to be, it is now law, and it has to be in compliant with certain businesses and property types. So planning your landscape transition early before your property type's compliance deadline helps you take advantage of the available resources that we'll talk about later to reduce the cost of compliance and to avoid future fines. Okay, let's get into compliance details now. The law applies to water suppliers, public agencies, commercial, industrial businesses, and homeowner association properties. As you can see here, the first compliance date is January 1st, 2027. For properties owned by local governments, this includes cities, counties, and water suppliers. Then compliance shifts to commercial industrial properties by January 1st, 2028, followed by HOAs in 2029, and then disadvantaged community government properties by 2031. So what do these dates mean? Basically, these are the dates that those property types must stop using potable water to irrigate non-functional turf. Okay, so what's the difference between functional and non-functional turf? The law defines these two terms as functional turf means a ground cover surface of turf located in a recreational use area or community space. Turf enclosed by fencing or barriers to permanently preclude human access for recreation or assembly is not functional turf. Non-functional turf means any turf that is not functional turf and includes turf located within street right-of-ways and parking lots. So, summarizing that, basically, functional turf is grass used regularly by recreation and civic purposes. This means sports fields, playgrounds, municipal parks, event centers, golf courses, dog parks, designated pet activity areas, etc. And then on the flip side, the general rule, if you want to think about it this way, is non-functional turf is usually turf that you are only on it just to mow it. It's likely, decorative, ornamental. You're only standing on it to do maintenance on it. It's most likely non-functional turf, and it will not provide any human access, such as grass and like street right-of-ways or in parking lots. There's grass in between spaces or bordering the lot that's considered generally non-functional turf. So let's look at a couple examples of both. So what you see here is kind of some obvious recreation or civic uses. So you've got, areas with picnic tables, you have designated state parks, you've got cemeteries, you have like a ball field. These are all considered pretty obvious, not or functional turf. What you see here is kind of what's generally thought of as non-functional turf. You can kind of see how it looks devoid of recreation or civic use. It looks rather decorative or ornamental. It looks like you only walk on it to mow it. It's the median in between 4 lanes of street highway. It's the parking lot areas that we talked about. It's the grass in between, the street and the curb often, or in business parking lots, that's just outlining the parcel. But it's not just how landscapes look that makes it non-functional or functional. It's really matters how the space is used as defined by the law. So for example, this is the area outside of RWA's office. At first glance, it looks like non-functional turf, but what if there were benches on it, and this space was used for a lunch space? Then it may be functional turf. But then who decides if the space is functional or non-functional? That's a really good question, something we've been toying with too. Technically, the law decides it is defined both terms, and so we have to go with how the legislation defines the term, but it's up to the property owner in coordination with the local water suppliers to make that designation. For example, a water supplier may not know that a business uses a certain space for a company picnic several times a year just by looking at it. So as you can see, there's definitely a gray area in the interpretation of the law, but the definitions themselves of what is functional and non-functional are set. Okay, so moving on, there's a few important details about the law itself. The law applies to a lot of property types listed here, but also less straightforward areas like the median strips, and the details matter. For example, for HOAs, the law only applies to the common areas, those watered by the HOA organization, not individual household backyards watered by the homeowner. The law only applies to using potable or drinking water to irrigate non-functional turf. You can still water non-functional turf with recycled water if that's an option for you or your community or the property. And then finally, pet relief exercise areas are generally considered recreational use area, which is considered functional turf, and therefore the law does not apply to functional turf areas. Well, we get a lot of questions about what about existing trees? So during the creation of this law, there was a concern for the health of existing trees located in what is considered non-functional turf if watering had stopped. Therefore, if existing trees are located in what's determined to be non-functional turf, the law allows for the irrigation of non-functional turf with potable water as needed for the quote health of the trees and other non-turf plantings. However, just having existing trees or planting a tree does not make the turf functional. It's still non-functional turf being watered. Additionally, having one tree in the middle of like an acre of land doesn't mean you can water that whole acre, saying this whole acre contributes to the health of this one tree. So then the next question is like, what's the right amount of non-functional turf that could be watered to maintain the health of the tree? And to be clear, the law does not specify this. The general thought is that the area under the tree canopy, basically from the trunk to the edge of the furthest branch or leaf, as shown in the left image here, is considered necessary to water for the health of the tree. However, there are cases where more space may be needed, or there's multiple trees with overlapping canopies or very close canopies, like the group you can see here on the right. So there's a lot of, again, gray area on what it means to water trees. And then still further, there are other reputable landscape professionals that are making a case that existing trees, especially in urban areas, have roots that extend well beyond the tree canopy line. And therefore, watering beyond the canopy may be considered necessary to maintaining that tree's health. So right now, there's a lot of discussion of what it means to take care of the health of the tree and where that line is of watering, not watering. And so details like the watering area for trees, in this case, for non-functional turf, is an example of where you need to contact your water supplier or a local government to better understand how they're choosing to handle this part of the law. Because as I stated before, the law does not provide clarification on what the health of the tree exactly means. In summary, the law's intent on this tree allowance is to protect current trees from the reduced irrigation that would result from the removal of non-functional turf, but it's not necessarily there to have people plant new trees to be able to water non-functional turf as a compliance option. Okay, so regardless of the irrigation area allotted for trees, which is kind of still up and being discussed at the local level, there are several best practices for watering trees while reducing non-functional turf or while doing a turf removal project. So these are kind of good no matter what you choose to do or what local governments or water suppliers say. These are best practices for taking care of your trees. You can consider doing a separate tree irrigation from the turf irrigation when possible. This can mean adding separate irrigation zones just directly for trees. You could cap or turn off nozzles that aren't directly watering tree areas within that non-functional turf area. You could convert overhead spray zones that were irrigating non-functional turf and convert them to drip irrigation or add tree soaker hoses. It's always good, best practice to water trees slowly and deeply around the drip line. They like deep, infrequent watering if possible. You can add mulch to retain the moisture and reduce evaporation when you do irrigate your trees. You could replace the non-functional turf with a low water use and native plants or non-turf ground cover. And then whenever in doubt, we recommend consulting an arborist for large or mature trees. And while these are considered best management practices, none of these are required by law. The only thing in the law says irrigation may continue for the health of the tree. Okay, moving on. In addition to the CII, HOA, local government, and water supplier focused requirements, there are future reporting requirements for businesses and HOAs to meet that meet certain criteria. So if you are an owner of a business or HOA with landscape area more than 5,000 square feet of irrigated area, you will need to certify to the State Water Resources Control Board by either 2030 or 2031 for CII or HOA properties, respectively, that your property is in compliance with the law, and every 3 years after that. What this will look like is the State Water Board is creating a form that you will need to fill out and submit to their staff to say you're in compliance with this law. RWA and other water suppliers are working with the State Water Board right now to figure out what that form may look like, and we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. The difference between other requirements of the law and this requirement is this one is directly the responsibility of solely the individual property owner to show compliance, not tied with the water supplier or local government. Okay, so we went over the basic requirements, the new law, and who has to do what, but my guess is everyone is wondering what happens if you are not in compliance by your deadline. The law says that public water system supplier, city, county, or city and county may enforce the requirements. So this law allows local government entities to define what enforcement means. Is it fines? Is it education and warnings? Or is it a combination of fines and warnings? This will all need to be figured out by the local entities by January 1st, 2027. Additionally, the law allows the state, through the State Water Resource Control Board, to fine properties for up to $1,000 a day for noncompliance. It's important to note that the state also can enforce on the water suppliers and local governments for not enforcing on property owners and customers for up to $1,000 a day, or in the form of a civil liability. Lots of enforcement options going both ways. So a supplier can enforce on a customer, the state water board can enforce on a customer, the state water board can enforce on a water supplier. But the key word in the legislation is may enforce. All of these parties may enforce. And it is uncertain at this point how the state or local water suppliers will be managing enforcement on the local level. Okay, so what choices do you have as a property owner and water customer to respond to this law, given the information we have right now? Your property, based on your property's compliance date, you could, one, stop irrigating turf with potable water, and really no other action is needed. The bare bones of the law, it just says stop irrigating turf with potable water, and that's it. That's where it stops. The second option is replace non-functional turf with non-turf alternatives like ground cover, mulch rocks, plants, trees, pathways, things like that, and continue to water that area. Three, you could do nothing and take chances with enforcement. Again, the wording says may enforce, and we're uncertain of what enforcement looks like at this point. You could also contact the State Water Resource Control Board and show good cause as stated in the legislation if you have an economic hardship, critical business need, potential impact on health and safety. You can ask for an extension of up to 3 years past your deadline for your property. The email address is here up on the screen. It's also important to note that there's no real exemptions for the CII or HOA properties, only time extensions of the deadline. So you can't say I have non-functional turf and I want this exempted. You can say I have non-functional turf and I need an additional 3 years, to collect money for compliance, to change non-functional turf out, etc. Okay. So to wrap up this first part of the presentation, I wanted to kind of directly address some of the most common misconceptions floating around that I've been hearing through our conversations. And first off, the law doesn't technically ban turf. It just says you can't irrigate only non-functional turf with potable water. Second, you don't have to replace non-functional turf by your January 1st deadline. You just have to stop watering it with potable water by then. So you could stop watering and replace the next year if you so choose to do that. You do not have to remove all non-functional turf and replace it with an extensive and expensive new landscape. You could stop irrigating some of it and replace some of it. You could put in a ground cover that's non-turf and continue to irrigate. There's a couple of options we'll go through of how you can be in compliance, but not have to do, the silver dollar gold lining package, hundreds of thousands of dollars later. This law applies to all government, HOAs, and CII properties. There's no size threshold. It's not, I have 1,000 square foot of landscape area. This doesn't apply to me. This doesn't just apply to larger developments. It's all developments of any size. And then again, the law does not apply to individual single family or multifamily residential properties or condo or apartment complexes that are not part of an HOA. So they have to be part of an HOA to be impacted by this law. Okay, so let's take a quick pause and check in. And I'd love to see answers to these two questions. Is what you just heard about the new law consistent with what you've been hearing from other sources? And then second, who is your current go-to person for non-functional turf information? Is it your landscaper, property manager, attorney, water supplier, city? Just give us a couple of ideas of who those folks might be. And I'll pause for 30-ish seconds to see if people can fill in. I think what we want to do here is just really check in with folks to make sure we're all on the same page, because what I've been hearing is customers and property owners are getting different information from different sources. And so we want to try to limit the confusion with implementation. Okay, it looks like we've got a couple in. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the second part of the presentation. So I wanted to kind of just go over a couple of options. If you so choose to replace non-functional turf with alternative landscape types, here's a couple of ideas on what it could look like. One of my favorites is the lawn look-alike option. There are non-functional turf ground covers that can be irrigated with the same irrigation system, maybe less water, but same system, and can look like lawn, but sometimes better and with no mowing options. There's also a variety of landscapes that can be created with the inclusion of low water use and native plants that bloom all year round and provide habitat for pollinators. As you can see with the Waterwise Retreat and the Nectar Nook examples here. You could also add more privacy to your property with larger shrubs that look pretty and create a more inclusive space for your coworkers and neighbors. And then finally, probably what I've seen most often is the slim space example that can be used on narrow spaces like median, curbsides, and include a few key plants in combination with mulch to fill the space that was previously non-functional turf. So the point of this slide is that there's a lot of options out there that could be used if you so choose to replace the non-functional turf in your property. Okay, let's look at a couple of specific examples. Here's one of an HOA with 130,000 square feet landscape transformation in the East Bay area. You can see the details here and before and after photos. The cost was about $4 a square foot and was professionally designed and installed. Here's another example of a church property, about 20,000 square feet in San Diego County. The cost was again between $4 and $5 a square foot and was professionally designed and also installed and had a bunch of significant water savings on their bills over time. Here's a couple of additional examples in our region that participated in a turf removal program that was grant funded. This is a local business park that removed non-functional turf and reduced their water use bill by 40% and also received a $15,000 rebate from RWA and had professional installation to get rid of that non-functional turf. Here's an example of a small business in Folsom that achieved a 22% water savings, also received a $15,000 rebate from RWA, and put in more of what I would call a desert landscape option by removing some of their turf in their corner of their lot. And then finally, there's a large shopping center example in Roseville, the Westville Galleria, that was turf, but is now a mixture of low water use plants and shrubs. This property received a $60,000 rebate from the city of Roseville and is currently saving about 8 million gallons of water a year. So you can see there's a lot of examples of properties already doing this work and receiving rebates for it. Now it's just, instead of having a rebate, if it's non-functional turf, there's also a compliance law layered on top of that. Okay, so let's wrap up. Just want to provide some available resources to you if you want to get started with this and also better understand the law. So first we have RWA's non-functional turf webpage on our BeWaterSmart.info website. We've got general FAQs, some of which we've gone over today and some not, and some with more detail. We have links to water supplier rebates, a flyer that you can share with HOA residents or business customers, and then information about this webinar series. Scaling up, there's a statewide nonprofit called the California Water Efficiency Partnership, also known as CalWEP. They've created a phenomenal website focused on the implementation of this law. It's nonfunctionalturfca.org. This is what the landing page looks like when you visit it. And once you're on the landing page, you can see there at the bottom, you can move around to a specific sector or property type that is required to implement this law, and you can get more detailed information. So here's an example of what the subpage for HOAs looks like. Once you're there, you click on My Property, which takes you through a series of questions to help you determine if your property is likely to be non-functional turf or functional turf. And then at the end of the questions, you will receive like a recommendations, like you likely have non-functional on your property and must comply. Here are some next steps to take. If you want to check an individual property closer, as in like a specific address, you can go to the Make the Plan button on the top right part of the web page, where you enter the address of your particular property, select the property type, and then press the Lookup button. Then the next screen, you'll identify your water supplier for that property, list any available rebates to help with turf and irrigation upgrades, and provide any information that's available on enforcement. So you can see here, this is a City of Roseville property, and the rebates approximately $2 a square foot. Then on the next screen, right, or I guess right below what we just saw, is an aerial map of the property where you can see your property and then actually draw on top of the map a layer of where you think non-functional turf is located. And then the tool automatically calculates the potential non-functional turf square footage and then also calculates the estimated rebate amount that might be available for your water supplier in the bottom left-hand corner. In addition to the individual property tools, the CalWEP website also has general materials by sector for distribution, including kind of general fact sheets. You can kind of see here the group of materials for HOAs. There's a guide for identifying non-functional turf, tips for getting started, case studies, kind of like the ones we went over, and then a lawn alternative quick reference guide. Additionally, there's template materials, again, by sector to help with communication. Like this is an HOA newsletter template story that you can fill in the blanks to let your residents know that this is a new law and how you're going to be seeking to be in compliance with it. And then just a reminder, all these materials are available for free at nonfunctionalturfca.org. And then for phase 2 of this website, CalUp is working on a Spanish version and potentially online video series. So in summary, 3 key points to remember. The new state law prohibits potable irrigation of non-functional turf on CII and HOA properties of any size. And the deadlines for compliance are coming up starting in 2027 and build over time depending on your property type. There's a lot of educational resources out there available to help you plan for that. The 2 websites we just mentioned, BeWaterSmart.info/NFT and nonfunctionalturfca.org. And then your water supplier may be offering financial rebates to support the implementation of this. You can find available rebates for your property by entering your address at either of the websites just mentioned. And then just to wrap things up, the new law impacts all of us, government agencies, businesses, HOAs. We're all in this together. We're all trying to figure out the details right now and how to most cost effectively implement the law's requirements. And now I'd like to hear if there's any questions that we did not answer during the presentation, or if you have clarifying questions, please put them in the Q&A. And then here's my email address if you'd like to reach out as well.
Hi, Amy. We do have a question from Robert, who's asking, he's asking if there's a difference of opinion regarding the determination of functional versus non-functional turf, and who is the final authority?
So we've asked our lawyers this, and they said technically the legislation defines functional and non-functional turf. It's up to the local water suppliers and local governments to interpret it. But there could be discretion with a water agency saying, we think this is non-functional, and a customer or property owner saying it's functional. And as of right now, there's no guidance in the law of, how that's resolved. So the definitions are clear, are maybe not clearly, but are stated in the legislation. So I would always go back to the legislation and say, does this property fit in with what the words in the legislation say? But, as you know, people can read the same sentence, 10 different people can read the same sentence and get something different out of it. And I think this is the gray area of the law. And I would just encourage, if there is a discrepancy, to work with your local water supplier or local government to try to work through that, because the legislation itself doesn't say, the state has the all-seeing power or like has the last word, or the water supplier has the last word. It basically defers to the definitions in the legislation that I think we're all trying to interpret, in customers, water suppliers, and local governments alike.
Hi, Amy. I know that we've got a representative here from a local church who was interested in options and recommendations for churches. And I know that you showed a case study. Do you want to talk about where to find that case study on the Cal website or some resources?
Yes, let's see if we can go back. Oop, one more. There we go. So if you want to look at the case study, it's on the CalWEP website, the nonfunctional turfca.org. And you'll look underneath this sector and you'll see the case study here. Um, you know, even though it's a church case study, I think you can also look for other examples that could be relevant for churches as well. We've done multiple renovations on multiple church properties throughout the years at RWA, and they all look a little different. I think the idea is to try to, if you're not currently using that turf area, to make it something that's usable that would add to the church community and the activities that y'all do on the site. Um, there's at least this case study there. If you want to reach out to me individually, I can hook you up with a couple more. Or if you have ideas or concerns of what to do or what not to do on that church property, I can help talk that through with you. But the basic of it is to replace the non-functional turf with something that would be functional, or replacing it with, like a non-turf ground cover if you want to keep that space open. Any additional questions, Christine?
I know that we received some questions on the types of rebates that are available. Do you want to talk a little bit more, especially regarding local rebates?
Yes. So if you go to our website, BeWaterSmart.info, if you just go to the general site, it'll also be on non-functional turf, but I would go to the main website, just the .info, and you put your address in. There's a little bar that goes across the whole homepage, and you can enter your address and see what local rebates are available. When you're doing turf replacement, there's kind of two things you need to look out for. So one is actually replacing the turf material with a non-turf material, like low water use plants, like native plants, like a ground cover. But often what needs to happen is also the replacement or modification of the irrigation system as well. So water suppliers often combine those rebates either in like a turf replacement program, or sometimes they'll be separate. Well, they'll give you money for taking out the turf, but also money for a smart controller to help with new irrigation, or upgrading sprinkler nozzles, or upgrading nozzles to drip. So I would look and make sure that you're kind of taking advantage of everything that's offered to you, not only the material, plant material rebate, but also the irrigation rebate. Um, so what you want to do is, if you replace turf with something that uses less water than turf does, then you want the irrigation to match that new watering need. So, if you have lavender, it's obviously going to have a different water need than cool season turf, warm season turf. So you have to adjust, and you often want to replace both. I hope that answered the question.
And then another question that we had received is, does the law have any limits on how much, functional turf you can have, or takes a look at does the law take a look at determining, to the degree that that functional turf is used or functional? Hope that makes sense.
Uh, from what I'm understanding, there's no limits or minimums or maximums on functional turf or non-functional turf. It's either one or the other. So you could have in theory, 25 square feet of like functional turf and 1,000 square feet of non-functional turf. So it's really the combination of both. But they don't address functional turf at all. In fact, functional turf is not covered underneath this regulation. It's just focused on non-functional. The tricky part is figuring out which is which, what's considered functional and non-functional. I do think people get hooked up on, well, it looks like it's non-functional turf. If you just see like a wide open area of grass, when that space may be used by a customer or property for a human purpose or a recreation or civic use. So even if it looks like it's non-functional, it may be functional turf. So, but in terms of like hard and fast limits of like functional turf can only be X% of a property's full landscape area or vice versa, there's nothing like that in the law.
And then finally, one of the questions that we've been getting is about who to go to for more information or where can you go to get help? And we know that lots of folks are turning to landscape contractors. And so, where can folks find information about qualified landscape contractors who specialize in water-wise landscaping or these types of projects?
Yes, so if you're looking directly for a landscaper, I'd recommend going to the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper website, also known as QUEL, where you can find people that have taken a specific training that make them qualified to install low water use in native landscapes, as well as they're taught about irrigation and water budgets for certain properties. So that would be a good place to start your look if you're looking for a landscaper that's more focused in kind of the areas of replacing non-functional turf or even turf with alternatives. And I think you put the link to that in the chat, so hopefully you can take a look at that website. You basically put your area of need in and it'll pop up individual folks that have that qualification.
Okay, that's it for questions. Our last chance for our guests to submit some questions, and they also have your email address in the chat and right there. Is there anything that you want to say, Amy, in closing before we finish up?
Just want to say thanks for joining us today. And this is an evolving topic. As you saw, there's a bunch of gray areas that still need to be kind of figured out of what's functional and non-functional according to local entities. What is watering for the health of the tree? What are the enforcement options going to be like at the local level? And I think just having some patience while we're all kind of figuring this out together as local water agencies, local governments, businesses, HOAs, and checking in. We'll check in back with everyone at the end of this year. We'll have more details. And then in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions, and I can connect you with the local government if you have those sort of questions. And I would definitely recommend going to our website, BeWaterSmart.info/NFT for more information. And can't say enough good things about CalWEP's nonfunctionalturfca.org website. I think that'll truly be helpful if you have an individual property in mind. So with that, thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.